The sky above Velos, 3 burned. Swathes of crimson and gold smeared across the upper atmosphere as the remnants of human warships disintegrated on re-entry, their shattered hulls consumed by gravity and flame. The fourth Terran fleet was gone. What remained of humanity's forces were scattered across the war-torn surface, clinging to life in a battle they were never meant to win. Captain Elias Rains watched the destruction unfold from the remains of a command bunker, his expression grim but unreadable. His fingers streaked with blood, some his, some not, gripped the rusted edge of a console, the screen before him flickering with one undeniable truth. They were outnumbered. Not just outnumbered, overwhelmed. The Zelthari Dominion, a hive-like species of bioengineered warriors, had deployed an extermination force of 500,000. Against them, the Terran ground forces had fewer than 10,000 soldiers left, and dropping. The bunker shuddered as an explosion tore through the ruins above. Dust rained from the ceiling. Elias didn't flinch. He had stopped reacting to the tremors hours ago. Behind him, Lieutenant Mara Vasquez, his second-in-command, staggered in, her face streaked with soot. Blood seeped from a gash on her forehead, staining the collar of her uniform. She exhaled sharply, shoving her rifle against the wall before pulling a small datapad from her belt. "The Zelthari vanguard reached the outer perimeter," she said. "We're losing ground in every sector." Elias didn't look at her. He already knew. The reports had been coming in for the past hour. Fire bases overrun, supply lines severed, entire platoons wiped out. The battle was not just unwinnable, it was already lost. "And the fleet?" he asked, his voice quiet. Vasquez hesitated. "Confirmed destroyed." A long silence stretched between them. That had been their last hope, a desperate signal sent to the Terran High Command, begging for reinforcements. But there would be no ships, no cavalry, no miracle. Elias exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to his forehead. He should have known better. When humanity had first encountered the Zelthari, the war had seemed logical. The Dominion was vast, its conquest of worlds methodical but predictable. The Terran military, though smaller, had studied war for centuries. They had strategy, adaptability, ingenuity, and yet none of it had mattered. The Zelthari were different. Their soldiers did not hesitate, did not question, did not break. They were a singular force, a weapon of pure, perfect war. It had taken Elias 7 years of fighting them to realize a single terrible truth. The Zelthari do not lose, not ever. The only reason humanity had survived this long was because they had never faced the full weight of the Dominion's forces. But here on Velos 3, humanity had crossed a line. The Zelthari had responded in kind. Now they were making an example of them, and the worst part, it was working. "Captain," Vasquez's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "What are your orders?" Elias turned to her. She was exhausted, barely standing, but there was something in her expression, a flicker of defiance that refused to die. She would fight to the end. They all would. He looked back at the console, at the grainy, flickering footage of Zelthari forces advancing in perfect formation, closing in on their final stronghold. The last remnants of his army were scattered throughout the ruins, pockets of resistance waiting for the command to stand their ground, or die. Elias clenched his jaw. This wasn't just about survival anymore. If the Zelthari crushed them here, humanity wouldn't just lose the battle. They would lose the war. The Dominion would sweep through the remaining Terran colonies, wiping them out before reinforcements could ever arrive. The entire species could be extinct within a decade. Unless, a dark thought took root in his mind, a last resort. It was reckless, insane. No military commander in the history of warfare would ever approve of it, and that was exactly why it might work. "Call Jace," he said suddenly. Vasquez frowned. The engineer? Now. A few minutes later, Commander Jace Thorne rushed in, his mechanic's jumpsuit stained with oil and plasma burns. He was a genius. A reckless, borderline, unstable genius. But that was exactly why Elias trusted him. Captain, Jace huffed, barely pausing to catch his breath, if this is about ammo resupplies, I've got bad news. I need the pulse. The first Zelthari soldiers entered the ruins expecting resistance. They found only silence, towering insectoid warriors, their chitinous armor gleaming under the pale light of Velos III's shattered moon, moved in perfect coordination. Their compound eyes flickered with the eerie blue glow of the hive link, each warrior connected to the collective mind. There were no human bodies, no defensive turrets, not even the crackle of a distress beacon. Illogical. Commander Rakesh observed through the eyes of his soldiers, his consciousness tethered to the advancing swarm. He had fought humans for over a decade. Their patterns were predictable. Defend, retreat, regroup. This question mark. This was something else. He signaled for caution, but it was already too late. A thin, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. Then the screaming began. It started at the outer edges of the Zelthari ranks. Warriors suddenly convulsed, their limbs locking up as their neural connections flickered and failed. Their once cohesive formation fractured, groups staggering backward in disarray. Rakesh recoiled. What is this? The pulse had begun. From the shadows the humans struck. Not in formation, not in calculated waves. Like predators, small, fast-moving units burst from hidden tunnels, striking with brutal precision. Explosives detonated in the midst of the confused Zelthari, shrapnel tearing through their carapaces. Razor-thin monofilament wire, nearly invisible, had been stretched across key corridors, slicing through limbs and throats as the insectoid warriors stumbled blindly into their own slaughter. The Zelthari didn't retreat. They never had before. But now they hesitated, and in war, hesitation was death. Rakesh tried to rally his soldiers, but the hive link was broken. The pulse had disrupted their neural network, severing the instantaneous communication that made them invincible. Individual warriors panicked, their movements erratic, unable to process commands from their higher orders. Through the chaos, Elias Reigns advanced. He moved through the battlefield like a ghost, his armor slick with Zelthari ichor. No hesitation, no mercy. His rifle barked death in short, efficient bursts, each shot finding its mark in the vulnerable gaps of the alien's armor. Behind him, Vasquez and her squad pushed forward, capitalizing on the enemy's confusion. "They're breaking!" she gasped, reloading her weapon. "They're actually breaking!" Elias didn't respond. His focus was razor-sharp, his breathing steady. He had fought the Zelthari long enough to know this moment, the exact second their perfect war machine collapsed into chaos. But he also knew the fight wasn't over. Rakesh had not fled. The Zelthari commander still clung to what was left of the hive link, desperately trying to reassert control. If he succeeded, Elias wouldn't let him. "Jace!" he snapped into his comm. "Where's my next detonation?" The engineer's voice crackled through the link. 5 blocks north. Big one." Elias glanced at Vasquez. "We cut through. Now." They surged forward, weaving through collapsed buildings as the last of the coordinated Zelthari resistance shattered. The insectoids were still fighting, desperate, frenzied, but without the hive mind. They were just bodies with weapons. Elias had no intention of giving them a chance to regroup. He was going straight for the commander. Rakesh saw him coming. Even through the broken hive link, even through the pain and chaos, the Zelthari commander recognized the human at the center of this storm. This wasn't war, not as the Zelthari understood it. This was something else, something worse. Rakesh flexed his clawed limbs. issuing the last command he could. A pulse of blue light surged from his mind, an instinctual rallying cry. The remaining Zelthari turned toward Elias, their bodies snapping into motion, even in their fractured state. Elias smiled grimly. Good. Come for me. He dropped his rifle and pulled the combat knife from his belt. Then he charged. Vasquez cursed behind him but followed. They met the enemy in a brutal, visceral clash. Blades against claws. Flesh against carapace. The Zelthari, once disciplined soldiers, were now feral, fighting with desperate, animalistic rage. Elias met them with equal savagery, his knife plunging into soft tissue, twisting between armored plates. He fought without elegance, without restraint, without humanity. Rakesh watched in horror as his warriors fell one by one. This was not war. This was a massacre. When the last of the Zelthari fell, Elias stood over their bodies, breathing hard. His armor was cracked, his face smeared with blood, none of it his own. Rakesh was the only one left. The Zelthari commander lay on the ground, one of his lower limbs severed, the blue glow in his eyes flickering weakly. He looked up at Elias, mandibles clicking as he tried to process what had happened. What kind of creature had done this? You are not warriors. Rakesh's voice was distorted, weakened by the hive-link's collapse. You are something else. Elias knelt, gripping his knife. His expression was unreadable. No, he said softly, we're human. And with that, he drove the blade deep into Rakesh's throat. The Zelthari commander twitched once, then stilled. Silence. Vasquez stood a few paces away, staring at Elias. There was something in her eyes, something unreadable. For the first time in years, humanity had won. But as Elias pulled his knife free, watching the last of the Zelthari life fade into nothing, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost, and he wasn't sure they'd ever get it back. The battlefield was quiet now. Not peaceful. There was no such thing on Velos 3. But still, in the way only the dead could make it. Elias Rains stood in the ruins of what had once been the last human stronghold, now littered with Zelthari corpses. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning chitin, the ground slick with dark fluids that steamed under the shattered moonlight. They had won, and yet Vasquez sat on a broken slab of concrete, methodically cleaning her knife. The motion was almost meditative, but there was a tightness to her jaw, something guarded in her posture. Jace Thorne, the engineer who had made the pulse possible, stood beside a smoking generator, his hands trembling as he surveyed the devastation. "God damn," he muttered. "I didn't think it would actually work." Elias looked at him, his expression unreadable. It worked. Jace swallowed, rubbing a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. "Yeah, sure. Worked a little too well, don't you think?" Vasquez stopped cleaning her knife. "He's right." Elias finally turned to her. "What are you saying?" She met his gaze, her dark eyes sharp, searching. "We didn't just break them, Elias. We annihilated them." Elias exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. His muscles ached, but the deeper tension, the one lodged in his chest, didn't ease. "That's war, Vasquez." "No," she said, standing. "That's something else." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the night more than any gunfire. Jace shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I hate the Zelthari as much as anyone. We all lost people. We all watched them slaughter colony after colony, but—" He gestured vaguely at the bodies, at the sheer carnage around them. "This? We turned them into prey." Elias didn't respond, because he knew they were right. This hadn't been a battle. Not in the way the galaxy understood war. Humans had always been at a disadvantage, outnumbered, outgunned, forced to fight smarter, harder. But tonight, they hadn't fought like soldiers. They had fought like monsters, and the galaxy had noticed. The transmission. The console in the ruined bunker crackled to life. A distorted voice cut through the static, urgent and unmistakable. "This is the Galactic Council. Terran forces. Respond immediately." Vasquez stiffened. Jace cursed under his breath. Elias stepped forward and pressed the receiver. "This is Captain Elias Rains of the Terran Defense Force." A pause. Then, "Captain Rains, what the hell have you done?" The voice belonged to Counselor Orlan Vex, a high-ranking diplomat of the Galactic Council, a coalition of civilizations that had spent centuries trying to contain war, to make it something predictable, regulated. Elias exhaled. "We survived." Another pause. When Orlan spoke again, his voice was colder. "The Zelthari are in retreat. Across every front." Jace's eyes widened. "Wait, every front?" "Correct," Orlan said. "Reports indicate that the moment their forces on Velos 3 fell, their entire war effort collapsed. They're abandoning contested systems, retreating into uncharted space. The war may be over." Vasquez looked at Elias. "You broke their will to fight." Elias said nothing. Orlan's voice dropped to a whisper, almost fearful. "What did you do to them, Captain?" Elias clenched his jaw. "We won." "You don't understand," Orlan said. "We have prisoners. Zelthari who should have fought to the death, but they didn't. They surrendered. They begged." That sent a chill through the room. The Zelthari had never taken prisoners, never shown mercy. For them to surrender meant that something had changed. No, something had broken. Orlan continued, his tone unsteady. "The Council is convening an emergency session. You and your team are to stand down until further notice." Elias felt a slow, sinking sensation in his gut. "You think we did something wrong?" "Captain," Orlan said carefully, "the galaxy has existed under certain rules of war for centuries. There is an understanding between species, even enemies, on how battle is fought." Elias's hands curled into fists. "And where was that understanding when the Zelthari slaughtered billions?" Silence. Then Orlan sighed. "The war was expected. Their tactics were brutal, but within reason." Jace let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, within reason, that's nice." Orlan ignored him. "But what happened here? On Velos 3? He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "This is something else." Elias's voice was like steel. "We did what we had to do." A beat of silence. Then, "And that is why the Council is afraid. A dangerous precedent." The transmission ended, leaving only the distant sound of crackling fires. Jace ran a hand down his face. "So what? We win a war and now we're the bad guys?" Vasquez exhaled sharply. "They're not saying we're criminals, Jace. They're saying we're dangerous." Jace scoffed. "Well, yeah, that's the point. The Zelthari weren't going to stop until we made them." Vasquez turned to Elias. "What if we didn't just stop them? What if we changed them?" Elias met her gaze. "You saw them at the end," she continued, her voice quieter now. "They weren't fighting like soldiers. They were afraid." Elias's mind flashed back to Rakesh's dying words. "You are not warriors. You are something else." And now, the Galactic Council agreed. Jace crossed his arms. "So what happens now?" Elias looked down at his hands. They were still stained with Zeltari blood. "What happens now? The galaxy decides if humanity is too dangerous to exist." They were being judged. Elias Rains stood in the center of the Galactic Council's grand chamber, unarmed, unarmored, and utterly alone. The circular hall was vast, its walls lined with representatives from 100 different species. Towering reptilian warlords sat beside delicate, ethereal beings made of living energy. The Zelthari's seats were conspicuously empty. At the head of the chamber, Counselor Orlan Vex fixed Elias with a piercing gaze. "Captain Rains," Orlan began, his voice calm but weighted. "This is not a trial." Elias said nothing. He wasn't naive. It felt like one. "You and your forces were instrumental in ending the war," Orlan continued. "Had the Zelthari won, they would have eradicated your species. No one disputes this." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Even species who had once viewed humanity as primitive had to admit the truth. The Zelthari would have never stopped. Orlan exhaled. "And yet?" He hesitated. What happened on Velos 3 was beyond anything we have seen in modern warfare. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room. Footage from the battle. Elias clenched his jaw as he watched himself move through the ruins. Efficient, ruthless, unstoppable. Humans emerging from the shadows like wraiths, cutting through the Zelthari without hesitation, without mercy. Then came the worst part. Zelthari warriors, broken and leaderless, dropping their weapons, surrendering, and still. The killing had continued. The footage stopped. Silence followed. Orlin leaned forward. The question before this council is not whether humanity has the right to defend itself. His voice hardened. The question is whether humanity can be trusted at all. Elias finally spoke. If we had lost, would you be holding this tribunal for the Zelthari? Orlan's expression didn't change. Perhaps not. But, Captain, you must understand, this is not about fairness. It is about fear. Elias looked around the chamber, dozens of alien leaders, watching, waiting, afraid. He had felt it before in the eyes of dying Zelthari warriors. Now he saw it here. They had feared the Zelthari for centuries, but the war was over, and now they feared something worse. They feared humans. The verdict, the council has deliberated, Orlan said. The decision is final. A pause. The whole chamber held its breath. From this day forward, humanity is forbidden from participating in interstellar war. The words slammed into Elias like a physical blow. You cannot be serious, Vasquez whispered beside him. Orlan ignored her. No human force will be permitted to wage war, train for war, or provide military aid to any faction. You will not conquer, defend, or intervene. His eyes locked onto Elias. Humanity will never fight again. A hush spread across the chamber. Elias laughed. A dry, humorless sound that made more than one alien flinch. Orlan's expression darkened. You find this amusing? Elias shook his head. You think banning us from war makes you safe? He stepped forward. You think a law will change what happened on Velos 3? What we are? A silence thick as gravity. Tell me, counselor, Elias said, voice quiet but sharp as a blade. If a species with no armies can still end wars, then what are we? No one had an answer. Exile. The ruling came with more than just restrictions. Humanity was isolated. Galactic trade agreements collapsed overnight. Human colonies were abandoned, left to fend for themselves. No diplomatic ties, no interstellar alliances. The message was clear. They weren't afraid of humanity's weapons. They were afraid of humanity itself. For years, humanity had fought to earn its place among the stars. Now, they were outcasts. Elias stood at the viewport of the old Terran flagship, watching as the last of the council ships departed. Vasquez joined him. They think this is the end of us. Elias didn't respond. Jace leaned against a console, shaking his head. No armies, no wars, no allies. What the hell do we do now? Elias turned to face them, a slow, dangerous smile forming. We adapt. The truth will shock you. They had made one mistake. The Council had banned humanity from war, but war wasn't what had won Velos 3. It had never been about weapons, tactics, or strategy. It was about something deeper, something that couldn't be outlawed, something that made humanity the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Survival. They didn't need armies. They only needed time, because the Council had feared what humanity did to the Zelthari. They should have feared what humanity would become next.